Good afternoon, and welcome to our webinar today, Implementing the Educational Peer Review Process. While you all have been muted, you can submit questions at any time by using the question box. We'll take questions after our first presenter and then again at the end of the presentation. So please don't hesitate to submit questions at any point in time. I am thrilled to welcome our two presenters today, Rachel Schwartz and Sarah McKenzie. They are both involved in the ASPPH Riegelman Writing and Public Health Program, which was launched in 2017 in order to improve writing in public health across the board, faculty and students as well. So Rachel, I'm actually going to just turn it right over to you and let you get started.
Thanks. Oh, one step too far. Right. Well, good afternoon to everyone. My name is Rachel Schwartz, and I'm an associate professor of health policy and management, and we just added community health to that at the Jean Ping Su College of Public Health at Georgia Southern University. And I'm going to start out with the discussion of the instructor-to-instructor peer review, making it work for you. It's a big topic, and I'm going to try to squeeze into 20 minutes a lot of material. I'm going to lay out a framework for the peer instructor review process, and I've made a series of links to templates and examples and articles available to you. Sarah's got them. I'm not sure how you'll get to them, but she'll explain it to you. And you can use these to develop your own system and tailor it to the needs of your school and your instructors. Okay, trying to get, there we go. Much of the literature and research on this particular topic comes from the field of faculty development, and I have some background in that. And so if you have an organization like a Center for Teaching Excellence or something similar on your campus, I would recommend being in touch with them about any sort of peer instructor review. They're all trained reviewers, and they can help every step of the way to develop whatever process that you want to use. In fact, you know, peer review or any review of teaching, for those of us who have been around as long as I have, this kind of thing it's a fairly recent concern. People didn't do so many of these when I started out teaching these many years ago, and that's mostly because for a large part of the history of teaching, the prevailing model was the instructor as sage on the stage. We all remember professors who stood at their lectern with these dog-eared notes scribbled in legal pads and just talking and talking endlessly, and the students were expected to collect their pearls of wisdom and spit them back up for the final exam. Now, though there's been a steady move away from the lecture-only method, and I'm not saying that lectures don't have their place, just not lecture-only for the most part. So especially from the 70s forward, there was this move away from lectures only. But it wasn't until the late 80s that formal teaching reviews became a fairly regular occurrence. And these reviews were rarely peer-centered. They're usually part of a summative, hierarchical process, and upper-level administrators or veteran teachers would show up, sometimes unannounced, in the classroom with their notebook to take notes. The primary goal of this kind of review was to regulate and critically evaluate instructors and their methods. And the summative results could be used to determine things like whether an instructor got a raise or a teaching award, or even whether they should be denied tenure. This trend expanded as academia moved toward the student as client model, and I think there's no coincidence to the fact that student reviews of instruction came into use and popularity about this time as well. So this approach did give a lot of bad feelings to instructors about these reviews. It made them seem punitive, and it bred resistance to being reviewed. And I don't mean to say that there are no benefits at all to summative reviews, but they need to be used appropriately. And their purpose isn't the same as the formative instructor-to-instructor peer review that I'm going to talk about here. So taking a quote that I adapted from Bill Buskett's Psych Presentations, what is peer review? The process through which a peer provides thoughtful, informed feedback to a colleague for the purpose of enhancing the quality of that individual's classroom instruction. And you should note here that the focus is on helping colleagues, right? A colleague. There's no one-and-done drive-by assessment. This is not a hierarchical system. It calls for a commitment from both reviewer and instructor. And it involves preparation, reflection, and it's a collaborative process. Now, I like the title consulting here, purpose of formative peer teaching, review, or consulting. I like the term consulting because it is more participatory than review. It's also more professional, and it's mutual. It tends to put professors off less if they feel like they're being consulted or consulted with. And I use the term interchangeably with reviewer, though with a few notable exceptions. I would say that the literature generally tends to use the term reviewer. So the purpose is, we've already talked about improving classroom teaching through constructive and formative versus summative feedback. Again, promoting the professional development of instructors and reviewers is a mutual, collaborative, two-way exchange. And I talked about how I would mention that both the instructor and consultant can gain from the experience. The research that we have, as well as any anecdotal evidence that I have collected, it shows that no matter what our experience level in teaching, we often learn best what we are teaching. So the very process of reviewing another person's work helps us think critically about our own work. I've actually sat down with reviewers and talked with them about what they learned from the review of someone else. So historically, successful teaching in public health has pretty much taken a backseat to publication, research, and grants. But recently, with new competencies focused on teaching and a proliferation of publications on teaching excellence in things like ASPPH, APHA, and schools of public health in general, teaching has come to the forefront of the field. We now see more recognition and support for faculty who care about becoming better teachers. And we see that there is a possibility to create a culture of collaboration in a school and or a department through this kind of supportive teachers. Let me take that one back. Ideally, all our teachers should participate in peer consultations, whatever their experience level is. Peer teaching consultations have, in my experience, led to a variety of collaborations between colleagues. So based on discussions about class, I've had participants develop and co-teach new improved courses. Research projects and SOTL have grown out of these collaborations and reviews, and grant applications and opportunities to mentor and be mentored. This is really a win-win situation. So let me take a step back here and just look at peer-reviewed teaching in the light of formative as opposed to summative practice. So a formative review would be informal but intentional, iterative, in other words, it's continuing, and in a way you come back to the same places but at a different level. It's individual but participatory, and it is private. So this slide should probably read some of the main reasons instructors ask for peer reviews, but I needed something short and sweet. The point is that in order to be a successful consultant, it's critical to know what the main goals of the colleague are, and to know when a peer review is appropriate and when it isn't, and sometimes it isn't. Again, I have given some links to Sarah, and among them is a link to a teaching self-assessment that I offer people who want to be reviewed at their pre-observation meeting. It helps them focus in on their biggest concerns and prioritize what's most important to them. And I've listed here 4 of the goals I see most often. So I'd like to improve my teaching in general is one that usually comes from new instructors. And they may be nervous about teaching. They're seeking reassurance. And in this case, it's especially important to narrow down their concerns to specific issues. And this is where that self-assessment really helps. They may benefit from multiple observations with you returning during the semester at a later date. And they should always be encouraged to sit in on classes with more experienced and less experienced instructors. They'll gain from all those experiences. I'm having a particular problem with my class and I need help. These also tend to come from newer instructors, and as you see, obviously the newer instructors feel more comfortable admitting difficulties than their more senior colleagues. I always know I'm being successful when a senior colleague comes in and asks for some assistance. So the problems in this particular goal tend to be described as disciplinary. So my students are using their phones too much, they're not doing homework, they're coming in late. A good reviewer will listen to this very carefully but keep an open mind, because very often such problems are symptoms of a deeper problem, and they're rooted in something like instructor insecurity and lack of experience, all of which we can address. The point is that there are a lot of factors at play, and we have to be aware that we have to address multiple factors. Number 3, I'm going up for tenure, award, promotion, new job, etc., and I need a review for my portfolio. I have gotten this before, and it's a tough one. Because there is no privacy, and the actual stated goal isn't to improve the teaching. The professional stakes are very high, and it involves a power differential. In other words, the reviewer's remarks can make or break something for their colleague. And in such situations, I really recommend calling in a professional reviewer from your Center for Teaching Excellence or someone from a different department who has no stake and no direct connection with the reviewee. This isn't really a great job for a consultant. The final one, I've been getting bad student evaluations, and the chair or dean is making me do this. The voluntary nature of peer instructor review is key to its success. This one is a hot potato for obvious reasons, not the least of which the person asking for the review doesn't really want one and is already feeling oppositional. I would just drop this completely and let someone else, like the chair themselves, deal with it. So here's sort of a short and dirty view of the peer review process that I like to use. Now, this is my ideal, and it may not work for everyone, but it's used in a lot of different places, and we've had success with it. So initially, there's the making contact, then there's the initial interview, then the observation or analysis of materials. There's a debrief afterwards, and you complete it by handing over notes or a report. So choosing the right reviewer is a complex issue worthy of an entire presentation. So I'll just say here that it's better to choose someone who is known as a master teacher and reviewer, and to avoid close friends for obvious reasons. And at the initial interview, which should be about a week before the class, and focused on being participatory, the instructor should be given as much agency as possible in deciding protocol, focus, and approach. This not only builds trust and makes them less nervous, it gives them a bigger stake in what's going on, a personal stake. I really care about this, and it is being addressed. It also has been shown to make it more likely that the instructor will get the full benefit of the experience. Now, because a peer review provides strategic feedback, not exhaustive evaluation, this is the point at which I would say the self-assessment I mentioned earlier is especially helpful. And questions like the ones I have listed here, goals, types of instructional behavior, what should I know about your student? That's kind of a shortcut to understanding the classroom and student dynamics. Obviously, it's not the end-all and be-all, but you walk into a context and have some idea of what you're walking into. Provision of course materials, certainly get the stuff for that day. I always do the readings for the day. If there's going to be a quiz, I get a look at the quiz. Some consultants will actually look at syllabi and offer written review of written materials. That's a lot of work, but certainly you can do it. Agree on a classroom protocol. For me, that's usually, I'll say something like, let's walk in together, and then the instructor will say, Dr. X is here to observe our class today. I will take a seat near the back of the room where I'm not in the line of sight of any student, but I can see well, and leave it at that. And surprisingly, students actually step up to the plate, and they'll even play it up for an observer. Finally, you want to set up a date for debriefing. Now, if you check the links I've provided, and if you keep in mind the importance of the participatory consultations and tailored reviews, you'll realize how many varieties of observation there can be. In other words, everybody can have a different observation. But I will note that all of your comments and your observations should align directly with the goals that you and the instructor set. Some of the mix and match elements that I use in my consultations, are I'll use interaction maps, and these are drawings literally of the classroom that trace how many students participate in class discussion, how often they speak up, whether there are patterns of speakers. Sometimes something as simple as the setup of a classroom can affect this. You can also look at chronological notes, and that would be a form that is broken down by time slot, and I'll fill in what is being done in each time slot and add remarks. And this often is a way to turn up the tendency to spend too much time at any one particular activity, and to point up the importance of chunking information. Another kind of thing, another part of any possible consultation might be a checklist of behaviors or activities that the instructor has discussed with me ahead of time and wants input on. So sometimes it's speech patterns. Do I say too much? Do I leave big silences? Or do I not leave enough silence for students to answer questions? Like that 7-second rule. Ask a question, leave 7 seconds, because 7 seconds of silence is usually enough to get someone in the class to raise their hands. And it can turn up things like, are you unconsciously choosing some students over others, or do you tend to sit in your seat and never move around? Again, according to your discussion in the initial review, in the initial meeting, you can decide how formal or informal the reviews are going to be, but they will always be tailored to the needs of the instructor. Remember that you cannot cover every detail, so it's great to have that prioritized list of goals. The debrief meeting should happen as soon as possible after the class meets. And I would say you could just do this, 15, 20 minutes over a cup of coffee Ask the instructor how they felt about the class. Did anything unusual happen? Did they have any special concerns? You don't have to go into detail here. This is mostly an opportunity to collect additional information for your written review and to reassure the instructor that you're not planning to do a hatchet job on them, because they will be concerned if they don't hear from you. The final meeting, where you hand out your notes or your report, should be scheduled about 2 to 3 weeks after the class meets, and it can take your remarks can take the form of a narrative, and they may or may not include notes taken in class. You rarely want to share every single observation you've made with the instructor, since there are usually some issues that don't fit in the framework that you discuss, or some that are not that serious, or some that would be unnecessarily uncomfortable for the instructor. The first thing you should do is revisit the goals of the consultation, and then just give general comments according to those goals. Again, try to make this a two-way conversation. At the same time, your written notes are going to have the details with specific examples from the class. So at 20 minutes to, while you were doing this hands-on activity, this particular student was busy doing something else, probably because they felt left out of their group or something like that. So it's helpful to remember Chisholm and Thomas's suggestion that there are several virtues that can elevate peer review, and they include patience and generosity of spirit. Now, I know a lot of you listening to this are going to say, look, I don't have the time, I don't have the people to do this. And it's true, reviewing effectively is time-consuming, and it's difficult. It's even a kind of mentoring. And what usually happens is there are a few go-to faculty members who are known as especially good at this, especially supportive, and they are swamped with requests. And this is really not fair to them. I think we can handle this by creating a system that rewards successful consulting, perhaps as points towards service or credit toward promotion and tenure. Moreover, the school should highly encourage all professors to be reviewed, maybe by having this be something that they put in their year-end review folder, just as a note, was reviewed by, as a way to improve the teaching profile of the school, and that way nobody's singled out, and more people will take on the reviewer role. Ultimately, when it comes to peer-to-peer consultations, when instructors are supported and rewarded for their good teaching, everyone benefits. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel. This is Sarah Weiner at ASPPH again. I want to remind everyone that they can submit their questions via the question box at any time. And as Rachel mentioned, she has provided a list of resources, and they are available for download in the handout section of the webinar platform of the dashboard, along with the PDF of the slides. So you can download both of those items, and they will also both be available on the webinar event page, along with the recording of today's webinar in the next day or two. We're going to take a question or two now, and then save the rest of them for the end after Sarah's presentation. Rachel, you did mention that that you have a lot of resources available. Are there any checklists or forms available in the list of resources to formalize the process if they're implementing at a programmatic level?
Yeah, there are. I've not only submitted individual forms, but some web pages from universities like Yale that have a very robust program. So I recommend that you go in and take a look.
Wonderful. The next question asks, is there a specific frequency recommended for observation cycles?
It depends on the professor. So if you have a professor who's really solid and has been there for a long time and doesn't seem to have any difficulties, you can manage once every 2 years. It's up to you. It's the people who tend to have more problems and the newer professors who need the support more. So I would say if it's a new professor, a new instructor, I would say once a semester at least, and it would depend on also their self-assessment and your assessment, whether you come back again during that same semester.
Wonderful. And then somebody else asked, is this process compulsory at your program?
It is not compulsory, but it is highly recommended. And in fact, as part of our year-end reviews, we do have the option to submit a form that says we had an official review, and you know that gets counted as a type of participation.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rachel. I'm going to save the rest of the questions for the end. So I'm going to invite Sarah to take over.
Excellent. I think I'm on. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Well, welcome and good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the country. It's still morning for me. We're going to switch gears a bit, but the exciting thing is that whether it's faculty peer review or student peer review, many of the concepts are very similar, and you can think of it as just starting to train our students to do early what down the road we hope they'll continue doing as faculty. Let's see. Sarah, I don't seem to be able to advance. Oh, I don't know if I just did that or you. My goals in the next 15 minutes will be to identify some reasons for why we should include student peer review into courses or into a curriculum, and then to talk a bit about the methods that we have used to incorporate it into a specific course within our undergraduate curriculum. But some of the rationale and the procedures can be used at the undergrad or graduate level. So first we're going to start with a poll. And the question is, when you are writing a paper, how many people on average do you ask for feedback? This is just to make sure you're still actually out there.
We are collecting responses now.
Oh, good. I don't see anything happening.
All right, I'll give it another 10 seconds. Let's see here. All right. And share.
Do we know what? Oh, there we go. Okay. So as expected, everybody is at least consulting with a few people. Looks like 2 is the most common number. Now, how do I get back? Can you get me back to? There we go.
Go ahead.
Thank you. All right. So I think that helps to start this discussion of thinking about why do peer review at student level. And I am going to be focusing specifically on the use of peer review in the development of student writing, but there are discussions and arguments and evidence around using peer review in lots of different ways, such as on group projects or other classroom activities. So in regards to student writing, the process of peer review has been shown to improve writing skills and to help students shift in their writing to a process orientation to their writing rather than an outcome-based orientation to writing. The process of peer review also allows them to develop the skill of self-correction or self-reflection, appraisal, and editing and correction. And in addition, setting up peer review helps them start to learn to work in collaboration with peers and colleagues. And we know that self-correction, self-reflection, and collaboration skills are of value and important for students to develop for all competency development, although I will be talking in particular about it in regards to writing. So we can also look at why do it from a faculty side. Most faculty, there's a lot of evidence recognizing that we need to work with students on improving their writing skills. There's a lot of evidence showing that in order for students to improve writing, they need to, in essence, read a lot, write a lot, get a lot of feedback, and revise a lot, and then keep doing that ongoing. But the evidence suggests that faculty don't often assign writing because of the time demands. And so introducing student peer review can be a way to help with some of the time demands of writing assignments and a way to help improve some of the outcomes. In an ideal world for writing mentorship, this would happen one-on-one, and the mentor would be somebody who is really a writing expert in the discipline. But we know that that does not happen in most of our programs, certainly at the undergrad levels. My courses that I teach have between 120 and 150 students, and so that one-on-one mentoring around writing is extremely challenging. And yet we know that we need to build writing into courses, that it's an important transferable skill set, and that students at all levels of education are not getting enough experience writing, whether that's K through 12 or at undergrad or graduate levels. So some of the common concerns, both from student and faculty perspective, regarding student peer review are that if you do student peer review, it'll be empty praise, that students will just kind of say, oh yeah, this is nice, this works, this is good. There can be a fear of social consequences for negative critique. So fear from students that their peers will be harsh on them or critical of them if they give negative feedback. And there tends to be a focus on general sentence level errors or editing errors rather than kind of the bigger components such as voice or tone or audience or fitting the assignment description. And so what we know, how to make student peer review more effective, we need to have a way of holding students responsible for taking the process seriously, and that requires some type of oversight or accountability for the process. And so we have to be really intentional about how we're introducing it into a course for it to be effective. So that requires, and there's data to show that with training and practice in student peer review, students become more effective in their peer review. So that training and practice, well, the training component can incorporate discussing pros and cons, having students reflect on prior experience with peer review, setting up clear assessment criteria for what they are making decisions and what you're asking them to be considering in the process. And when students are trained in peer review, just like really when faculty are trained in faculty peer review, it can increase the range of feedback. So instead of just giving line item editing responses, they can be assisted in giving a much broader range of feedback. It can improve the validity and the reliability. So there's some studies that look at when students do peer review, and we compare that to faculty or staff who are doing peer review. We increase validity and reliability of the comments and the feedback if we have a structured process and training of students in the process. The other thing is, from a student's perspective, the training and practice increases their comfort and their confidence in giving feedback. So they improve in their skills of asking for feedback and giving feedback. The other thing that's been shown to be beneficial is actually having multiple reviewers. So like we as faculty or responders at the beginning, having at least a couple different reviewers can be very helpful. And what has been shown from that is that it improves a student's ability to actually process the feedback. When they get feedback from multiple reviewers, they can look at it and seek out kind of the difference of opinion, and then they can start to make some judgment on how they're going to incorporate that into their writing. When we're building a system or training around how to do effective peer review, there are different ways that we can look at doing student peer review. Some programs will set up very specific criteria that students are asked to comment on and give feedback on the relevance of an assignment, the thoroughness, meeting the criteria in a rubric, the sufficiency of references, perspective or theoretical clarity, the discussion, and the significance of conclusion. Others will be more general and ask for reviewers to comment just with an overall score and general feedback. And there's some data to suggest that providing more detailed or more specific criteria for the feedback is beneficial, in particular to students who are earlier in the process of their writing. Students who are further along or more experienced writers seem to do well with both types of feedback. And so, as I'll get to in a minute, we've chosen to have a more structured and kind of developed criteria for them to follow in the process. So there are also different ways that you can structure student peer review. It can be face-to-face, it can be online with people knowing who their reviewers are, or it can be completely anonymous. There are pros and cons to different ways of structuring it. Certainly going with an anonymous approach can address some of that fear of potential retaliation from students or kind of power imbalances in the class and concern in that regard. We have actually chosen to do face-to-face, and I will comment on why. And I'm going to give you some student feedback that we just, I collect student feedback at the end of each course where we do the peer review, and I just got some from this quarter where they actually were asking for for a component of it to be online, so I'll be thinking about that for future. Okay, so what have we done in particular? So the University of Washington, we have a Bachelor of Arts and a Bachelor of Science, Public Health, Global Health degree programs. We have adopted what's called a writing across the curriculum model. I've given a reference to an article that I recently wrote in Public Health Reports that is kind of a review of how one can introduce writing into public health programs, both at the undergrad and the graduate level. But in writing across the curriculum, kind of a key element of that is that writing is heavily incorporated into and across all the courses within the curriculum. So in our curriculum at the undergrad degree level, we have a sequence of 5 core courses. All students are required to take those courses. They primarily move as a cohort through that sequence, and so the students get to know each other, and we really encourage them to think as a cohort and to interact with each other and view each other as colleagues and peers, which is part of why we went with a face-to-face formatting for our peer-to-peer review. In the first of their required course sequences, which is the course I teach, they are taught, we incorporate peer review training in that course very early on. And then in that course, they have 3 opportunities, and I'll go over that, for peer review that is built into the structure of the course. And then they continue with peer review with their writing assignments for the rest of their core sequences. So we are on quarter systems. We're in our finals week right now. And I am just highlighting for you the writing assignments that are part of the skill development and competency building and assessment within the course, which is our history and practice of public health. And again, this is the first of our required course sequence. Students are juniors when they start our curriculum. So in week 2, they are introduced to their first writing assignment, and this is an annotated bibliography. During class in week 2, we talk about the assignment, we talk about the rubric, which are the expectations. We kind of introduce the idea that they should start thinking about planning and starting to do research or discovery about the data that they'll need for their bibliography. Then 1 week later, they're required in class to do peer review. And we build in the training in week 3 for the peer review process, and then they come into discussion and they have to bring 2 printed copies of their draft, and they have to complete a writer's memo. Now, this is very similar to what you just heard about faculty peer review, where faculty are asked to think about what do they want feedback on. So it's that reflection component. And so for the writer's memo, I'll cover it more in a minute, but they have to reflect on their draft and bring it to the peer review discussion. And then a week later, they'll get feedback in that peer review session face-to-face. And then the following week, it's actually 5 days later, their final will be due. Then during week 5, they get their second assignment, public health emergency response and a public service announcement. Again, it's discussed. We go over the rubric, what the expectations are. We set the tone of what they should be planning. And then the cycle repeats. The third assignment is an opinion editorial. And then they have a draft, a memo, and the final. So for each of these assignments, we're quite intentional in discussing who the audience is, the tone of the writing, the purpose of the genre of writing, and the evidence base that they will need to make their arguments within that format. You'll notice that we're using different forms of writing, and that certainly fits in with our writing across the curriculum approach, where we are introducing them and exposing them throughout the curriculum to different public health discipline-specific writing, and really using these different forms to get them to think about writing as a process and to think intentionally about voice and purpose and audience with their writing. So in the peer review training component, we ask them in small groups to discuss and think about why do peer review. We ask them to reflect on their prior experience, what was helpful and what was not helpful. And this is quite important because many students will have done peer review without having a training or a structured approach to it. And often they will be coming with some negative perception around peer review, such as, people just commented on my editing, it didn't really help with me thinking about the assignment. That's a common one we get. And so at that point, then we ask them to, when they think about what's helpful, how they can be incorporating that when they are a reviewer. And we introduce them to the concept of assignment rubrics and specific assignment criteria, and we introduce them to the writer's memo. For the writer's memo, they have to, in advance of that session where they're doing peer review, they have to respond in writing to the following prompts. What do they like about the paper? We ask them to actually think about and write down what they see as the strengths of the paper. We ask them also to think about where they are in the process. Students come into the peer review session in very different stages of their writing. Some students will come in with what they think is close to a final draft of their assignment and they think it's ready to turn in. Other students will come in with an outline or a very early draft, and that can significantly impact how a reader is looking at the paper and how a reader is responding to the paper. If a student is coming in thinking that they are close to final in their revising process, and yet a reviewer does not think that that is where they are, that can lead to some interesting discussion in the class. The writer is asked to think about what concerns they have and what goals they have set in their writing, and then where they want the reviewer to focus during the peer review. So again, it's trying to get students to think about their own writing, to think of it as a process, and to figure out how or learn the process of asking for help and assistance in their writing. So in class, they're assigned in groups of 3. Each student brings their copies, they hand them to the reviewers. It's a conversational, writer-centered approach. The writer shares what they hope to gain. The reviewers are asked to consider how they can be good reviewers. It's based on a process developed through our Odegaard Writing and Research Center, and we've adapted it slightly as we've gone. This is our 2nd year using it, and we teach the course twice, so it's our 4th, it's actually our 5th time teaching it. In class, it's actually a fairly structured process that we follow. So initially in step 1, each student goes around in the group of 3. Now each student talks about their writer's memo. They have it's 2 minutes per person for each writer to say what they want the reviewers to comment on. Reviewers can ask questions about the writer's memo, but they have not read the assignment yet. So once all 3 people have gone through this process of explaining what they want, we then shift to the next stage where one writer will go first. They'll hand out their paper. Everyone will read it. They'll kind of draw lines. They won't do line editing. And then they will have 6 minutes of discussion around paper 1. And then steps 2 and 3 repeat, going on to the next paper. So it's structured, and this is to get them to focus really on thinking about what the writer is asking for feedback on, rather than if it's not structured like that, students tend to start doing line item editing. So when we do each time ask for feedback, and I asked for that. We did our last peer review and assignment were due this past week, and so I asked. We did a open-ended written response for students to give us feedback on the process of peer review, and overall, students do enjoy the process. It improves their assignments. These are their reflections and general themes shared by the majority of students. Improves their assignments. It is good to process their thoughts and assignments in class. They like that talking through it and processing. They like collaborating with their peers to build ideas. They enjoy becoming familiar with other students' work and perspectives and methods for gathering evidence. So they're actually, through the conversation and reading each other's work, they're gaining breadth in their experience and ideas, and really working with each other as colleagues and collaborators. And then they like that it forces them to work earlier on assignments and helps them to set up checkpoints. The areas for improvement, they struggle with the writer's memo. They really only think that the last part, what they want to gain from the peer review process, they see that as the only helpful part. So I'm going to explore that a little bit more. Logistically, the final draft is due 5 days after they do peer review, and they want it pushed back further. And so we always struggle with that. It really is dependent on course structure. They don't feel that they have enough time for the process, and so they propose that we actually assign them to groups on Canvas and allow them to do peer review in writing. Online Canvas is our course management system. So they want to do it in writing online in advance. I will tell you that we have done that in the past, and what tends to happen when we do that is they start doing line item editing rather than looking at the connection of the assignment to or the writing to the assignment, or getting the writer to focus on it. And then they always have complaints about citation style, and so we still haven't figured out how to help them with how to do their referencing, because we do focus on this quite a bit in class, and we certainly don't seem to have found the magic answer here. So in summary, what we as faculty have seen, or certainly myself, my co-instructor, and our TAs, what we see, especially as we watch over the 3 sessions of peer review, the first time they do peer review in the class, they're all quite nervous and reluctant to give constructive criticism. By the second time, they're getting more comfortable with it. And by the third time, it is a really dynamic and engaged conversation that happens in class. And they, as we observe them, they're going to the rubrics, they're flipping back and forth, they're discussing about how they found the research that they're using to present and make their arguments. And it's been really fascinating to watch over 3 episodes of practicing peer review, how they develop and grow. And we're hoping to build in some more longitudinal tools for assessing how this works as they go through the courses. So I'm going to stop there and see if we have any questions.
Sure. Thank you so much, Sarah. And just reminding everyone that they can submit their questions or comments via the question box at any time. But yes, we do have a few questions. I think you both have touched on this one, but I'll put it out there anyway. Any lessons learned, things to avoid when implementing either peer review at the faculty level or peer review at the student level?
Yeah, I think the biggest lesson I'll start, and I think the biggest lesson I've learned is the fact that we have to be intentional and transparent about the process. So I think recognizing that students need help in creating a structure and a process and learning how to both be effective reviewers and also to effectively receive review. And I think certainly from my experience, that's true at the instructor level as well. Rachel, I don't know if you want to add anything to that. That's the biggest kind of lesson learned I have.
Yeah, I would add, from my point of view, that a successful peer review really requires it to be a peer review, that is, colleague to colleague, rather than getting into a situation where somebody is seen as above the other person. It's about building a collaborative process.
Great. Sarah, this person asked, is this process used beyond the one class that you've mentioned? Is it used in other parts of your school or the university?
Yeah. So it is. So I'll start at the university level. So the process was developed by our Odegaard Writing and Research Center. So that is our on-campus resource that helps us with writing approaches. And so individual instructors can request that they come in and help them build peer review into a course. And when we started this 2.25 years ago, they came in the first time and kind of set up the process. And we've adapted it in my course, which is the first. I don't know across campus how often people are doing it 3 times in a 10-week course. So we've kind of adapted and used that model based on the fact that it does become clear that practice is critical. And then as the undergrad program, I do oversee the core courses within our curriculum. And I don't require that our other instructors in the ongoing courses incorporate peer review, but we do talk about it and we do have writing throughout. And several of those courses are incorporating it and start to also have and really appreciate that as the students are becoming skilled at it, we're all seeing the benefit. So we are building it across the rest of the curriculum. At the undergrad level, we have not implemented it at the grad. I'm not as involved at our grad level. We're currently in the process of revising our MPH curricula, and I'm advocating for that curriculum to incorporate writing across the curriculum, which likely will then necessitate incorporating peer review, because otherwise the demands for that giving feedback on drafts become really challenging to faculty.
Of course. Next question asks, are the writer's memos graded?
So that is a great question, and we do not grade them, and that is obviously my point about you have to hold students accountable for the process. A lot of times there will be a grade added, or people will use grading as a way to hold accountable. We decided we did not want to do that. Students get credit for participating in the in-class peer review process. So if they're not coming in and bringing their writer's memo and their draft and engaging in the peer review, they do get some points docked from their grade. So they do have to we do hold them accountable for actively participating. And we kind of rely a little bit on peer pressure to get them to complete both the writer's memo and to engage in the process of giving feedback. And because our curriculum is very much structured on really creating within them a sense of identity to each other as a cohort and holding each other responsible. We do a lot of active learning in class, and so a lot of activities, and so they're quite used to having to participate. But it is something that I've struggled with, whether or not we should be having them submit their writer's memos with their final product. We have not to date, and I think I'm okay with not.
Okay, and it looks like we have time for one more question. I think maybe this was meant for Rachel. This person is asking if you've received any feedback from those who have engaged in the peer review process at the faculty level regarding specific likes or dislikes of the process. Rachel, I think you're muted. Oh, there you go.
There we go. Can you repeat the question?
Yes. So this person asked if you've received any specific feedback from faculty who have engaged in the observation process.
Well, one of the things that I did mention was that I thought that we had to find a system to recognize the people who did a lot more reviewing, and I think that was some of the feedback I received that we acted on. But yeah, what I have found is that as we have created a system that is more process-based, that has multiple steps, and that uses goals to which we align, it makes more sense to people. They're able to look at it in terms of their own competence. It's a language they understand. And so often when we do things like peer review in public health or in other STEM fields, people will say, well, that's a humanities concept. So if we can couch the terms this way, it helps people.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both, Rachel and Sarah, for presenting today. And I want to remind all of our attendees that this session has been recorded and it will be available on the ASPPH website soon. You'll all receive an email when that is available. Additionally, we do have a few other webinars coming up. Please visit the ASPPH events page and filter down to webinar to see what those are. And finally, the registration for the 2019 ASPPH annual meeting and the undergraduate summit will open later this week, so I'm sure you'll receive a notice about that. Once again, thank you to our presenters, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.